Wir müssen diese Position bis Sonnenuntergang einnehmen.
Aber der Schnee macht ein Vorankommen unmöglich, Herr Oberst.
Das sind Befehle.
January 17th, 1942. The forest was silent, except for the distant rumble of a train cutting through the frost-covered landscape. The air bit at his cheeks, sharp and cold, and the ground beneath his boots was uneven, littered with fallen branches and frozen leaves. Every shadow seemed alive, every distant sound amplified by the tense stillness. A young scout, barely 16, pressed himself against the trunk of an oak, his breath shallow, heart hammering. He had no rifle, no pistol, nothing but his wits and a notebook tucked under his jacket. Ahead, through the dense mist, German soldiers patrolled, unaware that someone watched, someone who could unravel a plan that might cost countless lives. The scout's eyes followed the flutter of a map pinned to a board outside a guarded hut. Maps, scribbled orders, the cadence of their commands, all fragile threads in a tapestry of destruction he had only just begun to understand. One wrong step, one snap of a twig, and discovery would mean certain death. Yet, even in the shadow of overwhelming danger, he moved with purpose. Each careful breath, each measured step carried the weight of nations. The world did not know his name. The Nazis did not know his face. And he had no weapons, only courage, cunning, and an unshakable resolve to stop them. The forest seemed to hold its breath with him, waiting. By early 1942, the Second World War had spread across Europe like wildfire. Germany's military machine, meticulously organized and brutally efficient, occupied vast swaths of territory. In France, Poland, and the Low Countries, cities and countrysides alike were under the watchful eye of the Wehrmacht and the Gestapo. Their plans were detailed, ruthlessly executed, and often impervious to disruption, except occasionally by the smallest, most overlooked actors. Across the occupied lands, German forces were consolidating their hold. Supply lines stretched for hundreds of miles, moving tanks, trucks, and trains across railways that threaded through forests and plains. Communication hubs, warehouses, and small villages became nodes of logistical importance. Every map, every transmission, every patrol route mattered. Even the slightest miscalculation could expose vulnerabilities, though few dared test them. Scouts and intelligence operatives were often the invisible guardians of resistance movements. Young men and women, sometimes boys barely old enough to shoulder a rifle, became the eyes and ears of larger operations. Their tasks were perilous: observe troop movements, memorize orders, document layouts, and report anomalies, all while remaining unseen. Many operated alone, relying on intuition, stealth, and an intimate understanding of their terrain. One misstep could mean capture, torture, or execution. In rural sectors, particularly in regions dense with forests, the Germans had established temporary outposts and communication posts. These small garrisons coordinated local patrols, monitored transportation lines, and stored critical intelligence on planned operations. For the occupiers, such posts were low priority compared to the front lines, but for scouts, they were gold mines of information. Every map pinned to a wall, every whispered command, was a thread in the larger design of war. Resistance networks, though fragmented, understood this. They relied on local knowledge, the daring of youth, and the audacity of the few who could blend into the shadows. The young scout in our story was one such figure, a silent observer in a forest that itself seemed to be a character in this unfolding drama. Though unarmed, he carried the responsibility of detecting, interpreting, and reporting movements that could tip the balance between life and death for hundreds of civilians and fighters alike. The world outside these forests raged with conflict. Battles in the east were bleeding Soviet and German forces alike, while the British Royal Air Force and the Luftwaffe clashed over skies hundreds of miles away. Yet, for the young scout, the war was measured in footsteps on frozen ground, in the subtle twitch of a sentry, in the map that hinted at a plan so devastating that stopping it would require courage far beyond his years. Every observation mattered. Every note could save lives. And for those occupying forces who assumed the forests were empty and the youth harmless, they had no idea that someone so small, so seemingly powerless, could unravel the very threads of their design. By mid-January 1942, the forested region near the small village of Saint-Laurent in northern France had become strategically significant. German forces were establishing a temporary supply and communication hub, using the surrounding woodland as cover. Small patrols moved along frozen paths, while trucks carried crates of weapons, ammunition, and documents to nearby depots. Local resistance had noted unusual activity, trains arriving at odd hours, increased guards, and hurriedly sketched maps. The Nazis had a plan, one that, if executed, could have allowed them to cut off key resistance lines and secure the region for months. Though relatively modest in scale compared to larger operations at the front, its success would have crushed local morale and disrupted Allied intelligence gathering. For the occupiers, it was just another cog in the machinery of conquest. For those living under occupation, it could have meant mass arrests and the tightening of German control. Resistance networks depended on scouts to report such movements. Young boys and men, often underestimated by the Germans, became the unseen observers of this silent war. The scout in question, no more than 16, had spent weeks monitoring patrol patterns, counting sentries, and noting the rhythms of movement around the German posts. He carried nothing heavier than a notebook, his observations meticulous and precise, compiled in a small, water-stained journal. Every detail mattered. The angle of a sentry's gaze, the timing of a patrol, the location of maps pinned in huts. On January 16th, whispers of a larger Nazi operation began to reach local resistance cells. A convoy was scheduled to move through the forest at dawn, carrying critical documents and supplies. This movement could be intercepted, or, at the very least, the plan could be revealed if someone was close enough to witness it firsthand. The forest's natural cover was both a blessing and a curse. It provided concealment, but misjudging distance or sound could lead to immediate discovery. The scout positioned himself carefully along a narrow, snow-covered path that cut through a stand of oaks. From there, he could observe the huts where German officers pinned maps and gave orders, the tracks leading to supply caches, and the patrol routes threading through the undergrowth. Each observation was a thread in a larger tapestry, and his role was to follow the thread without being seen. As the first light of dawn brushed against the frost, the forest was filled with muted sounds, distant boots crunching snow, the creak of a gate, a dog barking in the village below. The Germans were unaware that they were being watched, that a single, unarmed observer was about to uncover a plan that could tip the scales in favor of the resistance. The stage was set. The forest held its breath. and the young scout, armed only with his courage and keen observation, prepared to step into a moment that would define his life, and, in a small but crucial way, the course of the war in that region. At 16, most boys in Saint Laurent were thinking of school, chores, or winter games. But this young scout lived a life defined by observation, risk, and responsibility. Every day, he faced a choice: retreat to safety or move closer to the truth. The human element of his story is rooted in courage under impossible pressure. He experienced fear constantly: the cold sweat, the quivering hands, the rapid heartbeat, but never allowed it to dictate his actions. In those silent hours in the forest, the weight of potential discovery pressed on him like the dense winter fog. He was acutely aware that the lives of villagers, neighbors, and fellow resistance members depended on the accuracy of his observations. His heroism was not in combat, but in patience, resilience, and clarity of mind under the shadow of death. From a tactical standpoint, the scout's mission was pure reconnaissance. Observing the enemy without detection required precise timing and intimate knowledge of terrain. He had learned to read the forest: the snap of a twig, the subtle shift in wind carrying scent, and the pattern of sentries' footsteps. Positioning himself along elevated terrain, he could monitor multiple points simultaneously, noting which patrols were most vigilant and where guards' attention lapsed. The documents he observed, the maps he memorized, and the patrol schedules he recorded, all of these were tactical gold, allowing resistance leaders to anticipate German movements and intervene strategically without firing a single shot. The forest, once a passive backdrop, became an active battlefield of stealth and intelligence. The scout's role was emblematic of the intelligence war waged across occupied Europe. In the absence of radios or formal communication, meticulous observation and memory were weapons in their own right. Scouts like him compiled patterns of behavior, routes, and operational plans, knowledge that could prevent ambushes, sabotage supplies, or save hundreds of lives. The young scout's notebook, water-stained and worn, was more valuable than any rifle. The intelligence gathered here would ripple outward, shaping decisions at a local and regional level, demonstrating how individual initiative could intersect with larger strategic needs. The enemy, confident in their control, had no idea that their own planning was vulnerable to the careful attention of a single observer. From the German viewpoint, the forest seemed secure. Small patrols, well-drilled guards, and careful positioning gave them a sense of control. Commanders believed their maps, schedules, and supply routes were invisible to outsiders. Yet, the same overconfidence that allowed the scout to operate undetected was a common flaw in military operations, underestimating local knowledge and the resourcefulness of the occupied population. Each misstep, one overlooked path, one unobserved hut, was an opening, a vulnerability the young scout quietly exploited. For the Germans, he was invisible. For the resistance, he was pivotal. This contrast between perception and reality underscores the unpredictability of warfare, where even the most disciplined armies can be undone by observation and ingenuity. At the heart of this episode is the tension between hierarchical command and on-the-ground initiative. German officers relied on orders from above, trusting procedure over flexibility. In contrast, local resistance leaders had to make real-time decisions based on fragmentary information, often relayed by scouts like this young boy. Leadership, in this context, was as much about empowering observers as it was about issuing commands. The scouts' meticulous reports enabled decisive choices, bridging the gap between intelligence and action. Here, leadership was distributed, fluid, and dependent on courage at every level, not just in officers, but in the smallest, seemingly powerless actors. Technology in this story was both limited and significant. The Germans had radios, coded communications, and vehicles for rapid troop movement. Yet, the scout relied on human faculties alone: memory, observation, and careful note-taking. His technology was ingenuity, using natural cover, shadow, and timing to achieve what machines could not detect. This juxtaposition illustrates the paradox of war. Even in an age of mechanized armies and advanced communications, simple human skill could outmatch technological advantage when deployed intelligently. The forest, the maps, and the patrol patterns became tools in his arsenal, transforming the environment itself into an instrument of warfare. The ethical stakes of the young scout's mission were profound. He risked his life to prevent suffering and protect innocence, guided by a moral clarity rare in wartime. While soldiers on the front lines engaged in direct combat, his bravery was quiet, measured, and deliberate. Moral courage, often overlooked in historical accounts, became as vital as firepower. Choosing observation over engagement, subtlety over force, he embodied a different form of heroism, one rooted in conscience, foresight, and self-sacrifice. His actions highlight how morality can shape strategy, showing that even in a war defined by violence, ethical decision-making could influence outcomes in significant ways. January 17th, 1942. Dawn had barely broken, and the forest remained thick with mist. The young scout crouched behind a cluster of pines, eyes fixed on a small wooden hut where German officers were huddled over maps and documents. He had spent weeks studying patrol patterns, memorizing the positions of every sentry, and tracing every supply route leading to this very point. Now, all of his preparation converged on a single, critical moment. Through a narrow window, he could see the officers tracing a route on a large map, plotting a convoy that would cut deep into resistance lines the following night. The plan was clear: intercept local couriers, seize intelligence, and consolidate control over the surrounding villages. Every detail, the timing of patrols, the placement of sentries, the route of trucks, was meticulously recorded. The scout's heart pounded, not from fear, but from the realization of the magnitude of what he was witnessing. One wrong move, one snap of a branch, and he would be discovered. He began committing every detail to memory, mentally cataloging the convoy's schedule, the number of armed guards, and the location of key documents. A slight gust rustled the trees, and he froze, every nerve alert. He could hear footsteps approaching along the snow-crusted path. A German sentry, unaware of the observer a few meters away, paused to check his surroundings. The scout's breath slowed. He had to remain perfectly still. One twitch could mean death. Time stretched. Minutes became hours in the frozen tension of the forest. The young scout marked subtle changes: the shift of a map, the murmured orders, the cadence of footsteps. Every observation was a thread he carefully tied together, a map reconstructed in his mind. He noted the convoy would move at midnight, carrying documents critical to German control of the region. If intercepted, or even simply known to resistance forces, The operation could fail before it began. By late morning, the scout had memorized the entire plan. He retreated slowly along concealed paths, retracing his steps with the care of someone threading a needle. Each movement was deliberate, ensuring no evidence of his presence remained. The forest itself seemed to guard him, shadows and frozen leaves masking his trail. The Nazi plan, crafted with the assumption of total secrecy, was now exposed, not through force, but through observation, patience, and courage. As he reached a vantage point overlooking the village, he made the critical decision. The information could not remain in his mind alone. It had to reach resistance leaders before the convoy moved. The young scout's mission shifted from observation to delivery, from passive witness to active participant in shaping the outcome of the operation. Night fell over the forest like a velvet shroud, the same darkness the Germans trusted to conceal their convoy. The young scout moved silently, every step calculated, following paths he had memorized over countless days. He carried no weapons, only the details etched into his mind, and a small notebook tucked into his jacket, ready to convey the enemy's plans to those who could act. By 11:30 p.m., he reached the resistance outpost hidden beneath a cluster of barns on the village outskirts. The leaders, a mix of seasoned operatives and local volunteers, listened intently as he recited schedules, guard rotations, and the convoy's route. Maps were redrawn based on his observations, patrols reorganized, and ambush points selected with precision. His memory, honed through weeks of painstaking observation, became the lifeline of the entire operation. At midnight, the convoy began its journey. German trucks rumbled along the snow-covered path, unaware that their every move was anticipated. Resistance fighters, positioned in concealed locations along the route, monitored silently, ready to intercept only if necessary. The goal was not destruction for its own sake, but disruption, capture of critical documents, and prevention of civilian casualties. As the convoy neared a bend in the road, scouts in the resistance signaled that the path was clear. The Germans, following their meticulously drawn plan, suddenly encountered minor obstacles. Fallen branches arranged strategically, subtle diversions that forced a slowdown. At the exact moment, resistance operatives moved to intercept the lead vehicle, seizing the documents while avoiding open firefights. The Nazi plan, so carefully plotted, had been rendered ineffective without a single bullet fired by the young scout himself. The forest seemed to exhale with him. The Germans scrambled to reorganize, confused by the unexpected disruption. Patrols were delayed, orders miscommunicated, and the element of surprise, the backbone of their operation, was shattered. The young scout, watching from a concealed ridge, understood the full impact of what he had achieved. His courage, patience, and intellect had foiled a plan that could have led to widespread arrests, tightened occupation control, and potential loss of life. By the early hours of the morning, the immediate danger had passed. Resistance leaders secured the captured documents, relayed information to Allied networks, and ensured the village remained untouched. The young scout, physically exhausted but unbroken, slipped back into the forest, his role as observer once again reclaimed. He had acted decisively, yet invisibly, shaping the outcome of a critical operation without ever firing a shot. The event, seemingly small in the scale of the war, demonstrated the extraordinary power of human courage and intelligence. One unarmed boy, armed only with observation, memory, and resolve, had turned the tide in a localized but vital engagement. The Nazi plan was foiled. Lives were spared. The forest, silent witnesses to his bravery, held the story in its shadows. The morning after the thwarted convoy, the village of Saint Laurent awoke to a strange quiet. German patrols moved as usual, but beneath the surface, confusion rippled through their ranks. Orders had been disrupted, documents lost, and supply lines delayed. Reports sent to higher command reflected nothing extraordinary, but at the local level, officers struggled to piece together what had gone wrong. Minor setbacks in the bureaucratic efficiency of the Wehrmacht often went unnoticed, but here they were a direct result of careful observation and swift action by one small, unarmed scout. Resistance leaders quickly disseminated the captured intelligence. Maps, schedules, and supply lists revealed the scope of Nazi movements across the region. Convoys scheduled for subsequent nights were rerouted, and critical supply points were reinforced by local volunteers. What could have been a devastating blow to the civilian population and resistance networks became instead a moment of tactical advantage. The young scouts' actions allowed allies to anticipate further movements, reducing risk to both combatants and non-combatants. Within the village, whispers of his bravery spread quietly. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones of the boy who had risked everything to save lives. For the adults in the resistance, his efforts validated the belief that local knowledge and courage could counter even the most disciplined enemy. Scouts like him were typically anonymous, yet their contributions were often decisive. In this instance, the young observer had prevented potential mass arrests, destruction of property, and disruption of supply lines vital to both the resistance and local population. Meanwhile, German commanders, unaware of the observer who had foiled them, attributed the failure to environmental challenges, poor road conditions, minor logistical errors, or miscommunication between units. To the outside world, it appeared as a minor operational hiccup. Yet, the disruption was significant. Patrol schedules had to be adjusted, trust between units tested, and the previously assumed invulnerability of the forest challenged. In practical terms, the region's Nazi operations were delayed for weeks, giving the resistance a window to strengthen defenses and expand intelligence gathering. The young scout returned to the forest the next day, unnoticed, observing the forest not only as terrain, but as a silent companion. Each tree, path, and shadow carried memories of the night's events. He had witnessed the immediate consequences of his work: the convoy delayed, the documents secured, and the enemy unknowingly misled. In the quiet aftermath, the significance of his actions was clear. A single, courageous individual had shaped events in a conflict defined by overwhelming force. In the weeks following the foiled operation, the ripple effects extended far beyond Saint Laurent. The resistance used the captured documents to anticipate further Nazi movements in the region, intercepting supply lines and disrupting patrol schedules without engaging in unnecessary combat. The young scouts' intelligence allowed leaders to plan operations with precision, avoiding civilian casualties and conserving limited resources. For a conflict dominated by large-scale battles and mechanized warfare, these small victories were vital. They sustained morale and proved that even the most disciplined occupiers were not invincible. German forces, meanwhile, adjusted their operations in response to unexplained disruptions. Convoys were rerouted, supply depots were reinforced, and patrols doubled in frequency. Yet, despite these precautions, uncertainty had taken root. Officers noted the failure of meticulously planned operations, but could not identify the cause. A single, unobserved observer had introduced a variable that could not be measured: human ingenuity. This invisible threat undermined confidence, highlighting that even minor lapses could have disproportionate consequences. For the villagers and the local resistance, the scout became a symbol of courage and cleverness. His actions demonstrated that war was not only fought on front lines with artillery and tanks, but also in forests, attics, and hidden paths where careful observation and quiet bravery could determine outcomes. Stories of his feat, shared in whispers, strengthened communal resolve and inspired other young scouts to participate in intelligence gathering, understanding that knowledge could be as powerful as weapons. The psychological impact on both sides was profound. For the Germans, the forest was no longer entirely safe. Patrols were wary, routines scrutinized, and trust in previously reliable procedures eroded. For the resistance and villagers, the young scout's success reinforced the idea that individual initiative could change the course of events, no matter how small or unarmed the actor. The war, often seen as a series of overwhelming forces clashing, had a human dimension where courage, attention to detail, and ethical resolve could make a measurable difference. By the end of January, the convoy disruption had delayed several Nazi operations in the region. The intelligence gained prevented potential arrests, safeguarded supply lines, and ensured the local population retained autonomy for crucial weeks. Historical reports from the resistance highlight such interventions as decisive in sustaining networks of communication, delaying occupation consolidation, and protecting civilian life. The young scout, though unnamed in official documents, had altered the balance in his small corner of occupied Europe. His unarmed vigilance had become an invisible weapon against one of the most formidable military forces in history. In the vast sweep of World War II, battles were often measured in tanks destroyed, cities captured, or armies defeated. Yet, history is also shaped in the quiet moments, the unseen, uncelebrated acts of courage that ripple far beyond their immediate setting. The young scout in Saint Laurent, armed with nothing but observation, memory, and resolve, reminds us of this truth. His bravery was not in firing a weapon or leading a charge. It was in patience, vigilance, and the audacity to act when every instinct urged caution. His story illuminates the profound impact of individual initiative in a world dominated by overwhelming forces. One boy, unseen and unarmed, could alter the course of an operation, save lives, and disrupt the plans of a military machine. It is a testament to the power of human intellect, moral clarity, and courage under pressure. In a war often remembered for its machinery and destruction, it is the human element, the willingness to risk everything for what is right, that leaves an enduring mark. The forest that hid him became a silent witness, holding the memory of ingenuity and resolve against oppression. The village, momentarily spared, carried forward the proof that courage could flourish even under the shadow of occupation. And for history, his act stands as a reminder that wars are not only won by armies, but also by those who dare to observe, to think, and to act with conscience when the odds are impossible. In the end, the young scout's story is not merely one of survival. It is a lesson in the quiet power of human courage, the enduring value of intellect and ethics, and the profound ways in which a single life can shape the course of history.